Thank you for joining us today for the 7th installment of the Department of Correction Insider Series webinar. Our topic today is cognitive behavioral therapy. My name is Heather Zwickert, and I am the Chief of Planning, Research, and Reentry. I'll be the moderator for today's session. Planning, Research, and Reentry is a specialized unit in the Office of the Commissioner that oversees and coordinates prisoner reentry initiatives, leads the department's data collection and analysis efforts, facilitates strategic planning, oversees accreditation and compliance, and provides project and grant management for multi-bureau initiatives. Today's presenters are Chief Mike Records, Dr. Vanessa Benefield from the Department of Correction, and Brad Owens, Senior Consultant at Social Contract. To introduce our presenters, Mike Records currently serves as the Chief of the Bureau of Healthcare, Substance Abuse, and Mental Health for the Delaware Department of Correction. Mike has over 31 years of service to Delaware DOC. He began his career as a probation and parole officer in 1991 and has served in various roles throughout the DOC, including probation supervisor, social service administrator, planning manager, and Deputy Bureau Chief of Community Corrections. During his time with the department, Mike has worked in program development and management, offender reentry, accreditation and compliance, policy development, and grant management. Mike is also a graduate of the University of Delaware and Wilmington University, and he serves as an adjunct instructor for WilMU, as well as Delaware Technical and Community College. He also holds a certified correctional manager credential through the American Correction Association. Dr. Vanessa Benefield has served with the Department of Correction for 6 years as the Behavioral Health Treatment Services Director in the Bureau of Healthcare, Substance Abuse, and Mental Health Services. In this position, Dr. Benefield is primarily responsible for ensuring service delivery by DOC contracted mental health providers to individuals under DOC supervision, including screening and assessment, therapeutic interventions, and discharge and reentry planning. In addition, Dr. Benefield works alongside community stakeholders to develop programs to meet the needs of the dynamic population within Delaware's correctional system. Brad Owens is a senior consultant with Social Contract, where he currently manages projects related to reentry, workforce development, and behavioral healthcare. Brad's history with Delaware DOC dates back to his college years, where he served as an intern at Dover Probation and Parole 12 years ago. Since then, he's built a diverse resume, working in correctional and reentry settings. A few areas worth highlighting include case management, reentry planning, cognitive behavioral treatment, staff training, and program design. Regarding CBT, Brad has facilitated over 1,000 CBT groups in Delaware correctional and reentry settings. He is trained to facilitate several evidence-based curricula and also serves as a lead trainer and fidelity monitor. While reentry planning and CBT are major areas of focus for Brad, he also specializes in grant writing, social entrepreneurship, and nonprofit management. He has a bachelor's degree in criminal justice as well as a law degree. Brad was born and raised in Sussex County, currently resides in Wilmington with his beautiful boss lady, Angela Wagner, and daughter, Olivia. So thank you everyone for our presenters for coming on today and sharing information with us. Today's agenda will include an overview of cognitive behavioral therapy, principles of effective intervention, DOC CBT programming, and an insider look at CBT. We're going to give you some information about ways to get involved and connected, and at the end there will be a period for question and answer. We ask that you submit any questions that you might have through the Q&A box on your Zoom screen versus in the chat function. And at the end, we'll select some questions that came in through Q&A and pose those questions to our presenters. Due to the large number of attendees, we may not be able to answer everyone's questions, but we will do our best to get to unanswered questions via email afterwards. We also won't be able to answer questions about any specific individuals or their experiences with DOC during the webinar, but we can provide you contact information at the end if you have questions about someone under DOC supervision. Also in today's webinar, during our insider look at CBT, Brad will walk us through a behavior change exercise, and we'll actually be asking for audience participation during that exercise. Our webinar will be recorded and post it to the department's YouTube channel. You will actually be able to, you can find all of our past webinars also uploaded to the DOC's YouTube channel. We'll make the PowerPoint available after the webinar, and we will supply certificates of attendance for those who stay tuned through the entire webinar. Let's see. So what you see now are is a slide that shows just the department's level 5 and level 4 facilities that we have throughout the state. And what we're also going to do throughout our webinar is conduct polls to keep things interactive. Note that your answers are anonymous. And for our first poll, we'd just like to get a sense, as always, of who's joining us. So we're going to invite you to check in. I'm going to launch a poll right now. This should be coming up on your screen. Just to identify the stakeholder group that best describes you. And I'll give about a minute for everyone to answer, and then we'll be able to see the results about who's joining us today. I'll just give it another second. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share our results. So today we have with us 45% of our attendees are DOC employees, which is great. Love when our staff are interested in other functions throughout the department. We also have 25% of other state agency employees. We have some attorneys, some community members, and some nonprofit organization members, which is great. You know, we conduct these webinars to, you know, to engage our community partners and other stakeholders. So thank you again, everyone, for attending. I will stop the share. Let's see. And now we're going to turn it over to Brad, who's going to start us off by talking about what is cognitive behavioral therapy.
Thank you, Chief. So what is cognitive behavioral therapy? Cognitive behavioral therapy, or also referred to as cognitive behavioral treatment. I like to call it cognitive behavioral training. You might also hear the phrase cognitive behavioral intervention, all right? We're talking about the same stuff here, right? CBT or CBI, but what is it? I would like to, if we can, see if this chat works. And for about 30 seconds, right, brain dump as many keywords as you can, audience members, on what you think CBT is. You don't have to think too hard, just chat 1 or 2 words or more. Self-evaluation. Thanks, Maureen. Let's see if we can get some more. Thinking before acting, evidence-based. Training our brain to behave and respond differently before acting, changing thoughts and perceptions, psychosocial intervention, retraining our brain. All these are great, actually. Thank you. Yeah, you guys are spot on, actually. Let's go to the next slide and explore a little further. Yeah, so cognitive behavioral therapy is a treatment approach, right? Or a tool that's based on the cognitive behavioral model, right? Which helps us understand the link between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors, right? Thoughts, feelings, behaviors, TFB, right? If you can remember anything, remember cognitive behavioral model is based on the link between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors, right? And in correctional settings, CBT is used as a treatment approach to help participants or inmates recognize the thoughts that are particularly unhelpful or unproductive or risky, right? And how they're linked to our feelings and behavior patterns. All right. Next slide, please. Right, so this slide gives us some core principles of cognitive behavioral interventions, right? And I want to draw your attention to the bottom right-hand corner, right? Because this is sort of the underlying premise of CBT. We can change how we feel and behave if we can change the way we think, right? So our thinking affects our behaviors, right? Agreed. And our thinking can be influenced. And if we take it a step further, if we're able to identify some of our antisocial or unproductive or irrational thinking, right, we could potentially change some of the unproductive and irrational behavior. Okay, so underlying all of CBT is that we can change the way we feel and act if we change the way we think. This is not something new. This is a sort of a philosophy that dates back a long time, even to the Stoics, right? And there's a Stoic philosopher named Epictetus, and he said, men are not disturbed by things, but by the view in which they take of them, all right? This philosophy or way of thinking has evolved over the years, right? But historical CBT researchers and authors rely on the same essential premise, right? We can manage our feelings and actions by changing the way we think. And some of the more modern authors, like Ellis and Beck and Dr. Ed Latessa, rest in peace, they have applied this principle to treatment settings and correctional settings, right? Let's jump to the next slide. So the iceberg, this is a model we use often in CBT to describe what the cognitive model is. But like with icebergs, right, what you see above the water are actions, right? But most of the iceberg, right, is underneath the water. And this is an analogy between like external and internal, meaning how people behave is what we see, right? It's above the water. But their behaviors are actually influenced by everything going on inside, right? Their thoughts, their feelings, and even further down there are their attitudes, their beliefs, and their value system. All of this influence their actions, which happens above the water. And CBT is really about focusing on what's underneath the water, right? Our thoughts, our feelings, and our underlying attitudes and beliefs. Hopefully that's making sense for you so far. Based on the chat, I'm sure it does. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. All right, in cognitive restructuring. So ultimately, we would like to restructure our negative thinking, right? Thinking that's not in our own best interest. But to do that, we first have to identify some of our antisocial thoughts, right? Or our risky thinking, or thoughts that aren't, right, very productive or in our own best interest. We must first identify what those are. And then, right, we challenge those antisocial thoughts, right? And that doesn't mean me, the facilitator, challenging someone's thoughts. Your thought process is wrong. That's not how it goes, right? The idea is to get your participants to challenge their risky thoughts, right? And then we teach skills and tools so that we can replace those thoughts with more pro-social thinking, right? More positive thoughts. So we identify antisocial thoughts, we challenge those thoughts, and then we train ourselves to replace unproductive or irrational thoughts with more productive versions, right? Ultimately, the goal here is to, change behavior and reduce recidivism, right? In other words, reduce crime-producing behavior. And if we're going to do that, we must teach skills for participants to gain better self-control, to regulate their emotions in a healthy way, and to manage risky situations in a more pro-social, beneficial way. That is the goal of CBT, right? Let's go to the next slide. All right, so there's more, right? And we're going to tap into the principles of effective intervention. Let's jump to the next slide so I can explain what that means. Right, it's well known, right, based on decades worth of research that correctional programming, like CBT, can be effective at reducing recidivism, i.e. changing behavior, if the programs are based on the principles of effective intervention. All right, let's talk about what those are in the next slide. All right, principles of effective intervention. If I'm using that, I am following up immediately with risk, need, responsivity. Based on the poll question, it sounds like most of you on the line here are DLC staff. or DOE or community-based organizations likely involved in the justice system. My guess is you've heard of risk need responsivity. If you haven't, I encourage you to go look it up, right? But deep down, risk need responsivity means three things. One is risk. In other words, if you're running correctional programming, you should target individuals who have the highest risk to recidivate, right? Our resources, our programming, it's not endless, right? We have a limited amount of programming. So let's focus and target our resources and our treatment on the individuals who need it most. And those individuals are those who score moderate to high risk on a validated risk assessment, okay? If you have high risk participants in a treatment program, you've checked the risk box, okay? Also, key point there, not to mix low risk participants with high risk participants, all right? So end of the day, high risk participants based on a validated criminogenic risk assessment tool, which the DOC uses, you check the risk box, all right? Need, right? The need is what we target. We often call these criminogenic needs. In other words, crime producing needs or factors, right? I like to think of them as life factors. But what we're actually saying is we want our programming, our interventions, our resources to target the needs that are most correlated to crime, all right? If we do that, we have a greater likelihood at affecting behavior change and reducing recidivism. And finally, responsivity is how we actually target those needs, right? You could think of responsivity in two different ways. You have general responsivity, right? Which is typically, referring to CBT. It's a treatment model. It's a tool that is used to target criminogenic needs, right? General responsivity, right? Like CBT curricula that the DOC is going to go over in just a little bit. The other category of responsivity is specific responsivity. In other words, tailor the intervention, the program, to the needs of the participants. So if there are individuals who are Spanish speaking, for instance, you should probably tailor your approach to have material that, right, has, Spanish speaking material in it, right? Oftentimes in these settings, you have individuals who have learning disabilities, okay? So you have to tailor your approach so that they are able to retain and learn just like everybody else, right? Responding to the specific needs of the participant is specific responsivity, and general responsivity is referring to some of the tools and treatment models that we use to target criminogenic needs. In this case, we're talking about CBT curriculum, right? Risk need responsivity. CBT curricula is a responsivity tool. All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, those criminogenic needs that I referenced, right? Or life factors that I like to call them. Right, research has demonstrated that some of the most common risk factors, or those that are most correlated to crime, are the ones you see on your screen, right? Sometimes they're referred to as the big 8, but almost across the board, all research points to these are the most common factors correlated to crime, all right? You have antisocial attitudes or values or belief system, right? Ringing a bell with the Iceberg internally, right? We have personality characteristics like impulsivity and self-centeredness and risk-taking. We have our peers, right? People that we hang around are very influential. We have antisocial peers, or peers that are engaged in crime and other things. We are more likely to do the same, right? You have history of antisocial behavior, right? That's typically checked with a, your jacket, right? How many crimes have you committed? The more crimes you've committed in the past is actually correlated to you committing additional crimes in the future. That the history of criminal behavior is not something we can change, but it is a factor, right? Then we have substance abuse and mental health. I think that's self-explanatory, right? We have family and family unification or family dysfunction being a risk factor there. Education and employment, right? Without those two things, we're not as likely to maintain stability and not commit crime, right? And then we have leisure activities and free time, right? The more unproductive use of our free time, the greater likelihood we are to get in trouble, right? I think deep down, these are intuitive, right? We all know them to be true, but I think we have a poll question for you. And Heather, I'm happy to set this up, right? Do you have the question specifically, Heather? So I don't get it.
I do. So we're gonna go ahead and launch a poll, a second poll right now. I think everyone should be able to see it. So, Brad is talking to us about criminogenic risks and need factors. And what we're asking is, what do you think is the criminogenic need that is most predictive of recidivism? So give everyone a minute to answer. You guys are weighing in real quick. Thank you so much. We'll just give it a few more seconds. See if anyone else wants to put in an answer. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and I will share our results. So Brad, our participants today have indicated that 47% believe that antisocial attitudes, personality, and peers would be the most predictive, followed very closely by 42% substance abuse and mental health. Can you tell us what the correct answer is and give a little explanation?
Yeah, sure. So the majority of you got it right? Antisocial attitudes, values, and belief systems, antisocial thoughts, right? Those are most correlated to crime, right? A lot of you also said substance abuse and mental health. I think it's important to note that, oftentimes our underlying beliefs or values or thoughts and feelings and the way we view situations lead to substance abuse, right? So that risky thinking, those internal values and belief systems can lead one to abuse substances, right? So these things are very linked. I don't want to discredit that substance abuse and mental health doesn't play a factor, because it does. And I don't want to discredit, right, those of you who selected education and employment, which are also extremely important to maintaining stability and not committing crime, right? But based on the evidence and based on the research, the factors that are most predictive of criminal behavior are thoughts, feelings, attitudes, and beliefs, right? We call those the big four, and that's what you see on your screen. And those factors are what CBT targets, all right? There are other resources and interventions that are applied to target education and employment, right? We have the DOE, we have various employment and training activities going on within the DOC, targeting those criminogenic needs of employment and education, right? We have mental health counselors, we have substance abuse treatment programming, again, to target those other criminogenic needs. Best practices says if you can target as many needs as possible, you can check all those boxes, you're going to reduce significantly the likelihood of recidivism. And that's what we're here to do, to reduce the likelihood of recidivism by using evidence-based interventions like CBT, pairing it with other important things like education and training and employment, right? Mental health and substance abuse activities, family reunification. If we can target those needs, then we are doing our job to increase the likelihood of pro-social behavior, right? Makes sense, good. Let's jump to the next slide. Another key point is that most CBT curriculum that we use are based on the social learning theory, right? You can look at it in like a stepwise process, right? So typically how CBT is delivered is that staff, a facilitator like myself, will teach a topic or a step, right? A skill. I'll talk about it. I'll maybe give some underlying principles, some background information, right? The teaching part, maybe there's a whiteboard involved and I'm doing the talking and teaching, right, as a facilitator. And then, right, next step is me modeling whatever skill that I'm teaching. So if we're talking about regulating our anger, right, in risky situations, well, then I'm going to role play or model what that looks like. I'm going to show them that skill in action, right? And then take another step, right? They are going to practice based on the role that I modeled. So it's important for me to do it right if they're going to also then do it right, right? After they participate and do their practice, then I give them feedback, right? We talk and reflect about it, and then they do it again. And typically, most CBT curriculum that we use follow these steps. Think of it as like teaching your child how to tie their shoe, right? You're going to talk to your kid about, well, there's a couple options. You got the loop, swoop, and pull, and you got the bunny ears, right? Here's how you do one, right? Now we're modeling, right? Let me show you the loop, swoop, and pull, because that's the best way, right? I show the kid how to do it on the shoe. And then I give the kid the shoe, right? And they try it. They probably mess it up a few times. I give them some feedback, right? And we try it again. It's the same approach with teaching skills to regulating our thoughts and our feelings, and ultimately our actions. CBT curriculum is typically built this way. So I think that's all I have for you for now. DOC is going to take over here, but I'll jump back in later in the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Brad. We'll turn it over now to Chief Records and Dr. Benefield, who are going to talk to us about the various CBT offerings within the department. So Chief Records and Dr. Benefield.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So to kind of maybe close just a little bit of a loop on what Brad was talking about and how we got to where we are today, I just want to briefly take you back to the years 2010, 2012. The state of Delaware and Department of Correction went through something called the Justice Reinvestment Initiative. It was a federal grant program. We had a technical assistance nonprofit called the Vera Institute of Justice that came in, basically did an analysis of our system and came up with several different strategies for us to ultimately reduce recidivism, which would then help reduce our prison population. That was the ultimate goal. And CBT is one of several evidence-based practices that Vera helped introduce us to. We at the time had the LSIR, which you on the call that are familiar with that. It's a risk needs assessment. So we used it primarily at that time to supervise people in the community. And since the JRI initiative, we've used it in order to also kind of indicate treatment for our incarcerated individuals. And so Vera also put us onto the George Mason University, which brought in the RNR tool, the risk need responsivity tool that Brad spoke about. And we use those in conjunction together to come up with what is the most effective group of programming for an individual, for nothing else other than to reduce recidivism. And so these are the several different groups: Group A, Group B, C, D, and E. We're here to talk about B, which is criminal thinking cognitive restructuring. And so what do we have in the DOC for these treatment purposes? In our current treatment services contract with our vendor Centurion, we have what's designated as high dose CBT, which is our CBI suite, which is the University of Cincinnati Behavioral Interventions curriculum. So that's CBI, I want to say CC core curriculum, but now I think it's called CBI CA. The CBI substance abuse curriculum, the CBI employment curriculum, and we're just now in the process of redoing our sex offender treatment program, and they'll be using the CBI sex offender curriculum. On the medium dose side, what we do, we have T for C, Thinking for a Change. Thinking for a Change is a National Institute of Corrections developed program. It's about 25 sessions, designed to be about 25 sessions. So between 25 and 50 hours of treatment. CBI is 55 session treatment intervention. The SA and the EMP are just slightly less than that, but anywhere from 40 to 100 hours of intervention. Low dose CBT is something that we have put in place since about 3 years ago. It's just now in the process of coming back. And so we use the Texas Christian University mapping and motivational enhancement interventions. And that's used primarily with individuals who are on probation in the community that are struggling in some way. We use our administrative commitment process to bring that individual back into a level 4 facility for a weekend intervention. And we employ those TCU low dose curriculums to try to get them back on track. Some of the others that we use in the DOC, one that I'm not highly familiar with, used to be used by DOE, and I'm not sure where it's used exactly now, but it's called MRT, which is moral recognition therapy. In our women's facility, we also use something that's called Moving On. It's a CBT program designed specifically for women that are incarcerated. It's heavily involved the trauma that has gone on in those individuals' lives before they became incarcerated. And just the other night, we had a presentation that we did up at Cherry Lane with our Citizens Academy. And I was talking to a lady there who's a religious services volunteer for the DOC. And she talked about a CBT curriculum that they actually use in their church groups that they conduct with inside the DOC. So CBT programs focus on that criminal thinking. They use the cognitive restructuring techniques to try to change the way people understand their emotions, their thought patterns, and then change the way that they react to those thoughts and emotions. The Group B also includes interpersonal and social skill interventions. So within our substance use program, we do a lot of social skill interventions, and some of those are also taught within the CBI and T4C curriculums. So these programs, Group B programs, are trying to target mostly the high and moderate risk offenders. Anybody that turns out to be a low risk offender, they typically won't go into a Group B intervention unless they have a very high need for substance abuse treatment. All right, next slide. Sorry, I got one ahead, sorry. I'm looking at my, no, two back, sorry. All right, so the LSIR and RNR helps indicate high, medium, or low for supervision and treatment. So we again are talking about the antisocial behaviors, the antisocial thinking. So some individuals make bad decisions, they use poor judgment, they may have faulty thinking in many situations. Some individuals, not so much, but that bad thinking, those emotions overpowering somebody may come out in high stress or high visibility situations. So the CBT is designed to change those thought processes so that people, when they get involved in those situations, that they would typically revert to a normal behavior, and normal being for them to act out, to run away, to do something like go and use an illegal substance. The CBT teaches them different ways to deal with those thoughts and those emotions. So the last thing for this slide is just that once the LSIR, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use the old terminology, the LSI or LSRNR, which is our new version of the LSIR, and the RNR, they're going to indicate one of those groups. And then within the group, there may be 2 or 3 different interventions, and that classification team will sit down and try to come up with what is the best 1, 2, or 3 interventions that we could give to that individual to reduce recidivism. And then they're going to formalize that classification decision, and that person will be then entered into the program. Now, next slide. So CBI EMP is a cognitive behavioral intervention specifically for employment. And this is designed for individuals who have a risk of high risk of recidivism, and specifically they have high employment needs. So they're maybe indigent, maybe they don't really have a place to stay, and they do things that get them in trouble because of that issue. And so CBI, EMP kind of works with them around making better decisions, dealing with the emotions that may come with not having a place to stay or not having a good job, and tries to educate them and teach them the best way to get a job, keep a job, move on to the next advancement that may be at that particular job, or maybe look for a job opportunity outside of the one they currently have to basically advance and become, a stable, good citizen. And so the modules are begins with motivational enhancement, and then it moves into the cognitive restructuring or changing the thought patterns. Then it moves into what are the social skills and the emotional regulation skills that an individual needs in order to be successful at a job. Finally, it moves into problem solving. So if something happens at work, for instance, you get a phone call, somebody is at home saying that the babysitter's not available, you need to come home. What's the best way to handle that with your boss, for instance? Do you just get up and leave? Do you go and explain to the boss that you have a situation? It kind of works all those typical things that maybe a person would have done in their past. It turned out to be bad decisions. It talks about how to problem solve for the most effective way to resolve a situation so that they retain the job, they retain their income, and they don't go back into an incarcerated setting. And finally, the last part of EMP talks about planning. So develop a plan, how to stay on track, how to respond to any roadblocks, rehearsing the plan, and ultimately carrying out that plan. And so the next slide, please, Heather, and Vanessa will take this one.
Absolutely. For Group B, we have a number of different programs and curriculum, as you probably have encountered. Another is Victim Voices Heard. Victim Voices Heard is actually a 24-week program, but it's actually split into 12 and 12. And the first part is focused on courage to change. Again, here we're targeting criminal thinking for that Group B. It is a NIC accredited program that follows the 8 guiding principles. It incorporates the research to results and evidence-based practices. Here in Victim Voices Heard, and this really throughout the whole program, a lot of the focus is on skill building, actually. So even though you're taking the time to look at one's cognitions, you're walking them through that restructuring process that the chief referenced and Brad referenced earlier. You also are working up to that point where you actually educate them on the skill and then you practice the skill. So although that there's a lot of focus on cognition, we are looking at the behavior as well. For this particular program, the interventions are quite based on interactive journaling. However, there are methods that allow the facilitators to bring in other resources such as speakers, using different media, audio, visuals, breaking individuals up into dyads or triads to work out different scenarios where they have multiple opportunities to process the material, how they're responding to the material. So I just want to be sure that individuals understand, because I think we're talking about CBT for the purposes of the webinar in the simplistic terms, but it's definitely an engaged process where you can have individuals focusing on antisocial cognitions that they held true for so many years, and they're taking that time session after session to really break it down and understand that core belief that's attached to it, and how they get to that place of a healthy cognition. So interactive journaling methods are used to help with that. as well as those other resources that I mentioned are used to help with that, because you want at the very most to approach individuals from a place that meets right where they are. And that's why that responsivity of an R&R is so very important. So the second portion of the Victim Voices Heard is the impact of crime. Here, again, we're targeting the criminal thinking. We're looking at how offenders think about their past actions, the impact of those actions, really from a social cultural perspective, in addition to the victim and as well as themselves. You know, what is that impact for them? What are those consequences? So those sessions are used to kind of, you know, really look at and basically do a chain of that information based on the impact of that crime. And then obviously a huge amount of time is dedicated to victim empathy and really understanding that. And that can take a while, depending on where individuals are in treatment, where they are as far as how attached they are to the original core beliefs or faulty beliefs, may determine how long it takes for them to process through. So the second part is also is a 12-week session. And again, you know, certain sections of the program can go quicker, and some you can spend a little bit more time, depending on the needs of the individuals. All right. T4C.
Okay.
Chief, did you want to take T4C?
Yep, I got it. Okay, so Thinking for a Change was developed by the National Institute of Corrections. It's been around for several years. The DOC has used it for the past 10 or 12 years in different places, but for the last 3 or 4 years, we've had a contract for an outside vendor to deliver it. The initial vendor was Gateway Corporation, and now it's delivered by our behavioral health vendor, Centurion. The program was designed to be delivered specifically to justice-involved adults and youth, and can be used with both males and females. It's intended for groups of between 8 and 12, and should be delivered only by facilitators who have the NIC training. NIC provides training themselves. They also have certified organizations where there are trained trainers within. And so if NIC has the availability, they will come on site to your organization and train. It's usually a 32-hour training, during which time you go through the research behind how it got developed. You go through each of the 25 modules themselves, and then you have to be able to deliver 2 to 3 training sessions yourself, and basically be evaluated by the instructors as well as your peers who are in the training with you. Due to its integrated structure, T4C is what we call a closed group, meaning that members need to start at the beginning of a cohort or a cycle, and they may not join mid-group. So usually there's 2 to 5 sessions that somebody new is allowed to join, but the DOC classification tries very hard to get the 8 to 12 members in there at the beginning and not bring anybody new in until the next cohort starts. And those cohorts, depending on the institution, are starting about every 90 to 120 days. It takes about 90 days to get through one. T4C comprised of 25 sessions. They build on each other. So it starts out with some minor skills and builds and builds and builds until you're using all those skills together. The program also requires role plays and skits that the instructors kind of set up with the participants. Ideally, the curriculum is delivered 2 times a week with a minimum recommended dosage of once per week and a maximum recommended dosage of 3 times per week. We do have one aberration from that method in our Reflections program. Reflections is our DUI program, and that's only delivered for 90 days. So it's 3 to 4 times a week in that program, coupled with an interactive journal that the participants use. And so the program is, T4C is designed to provide, no, I'm sorry, I already said that, specifically for justice involved individuals. So while this may be used in other settings, it was designed by NIC just for prisons, jails, and community confinement settings. And that's it for that slide. Vanessa, you're going to take transitions?
Absolutely. So that brings us to transitions, our sex offending treatment program. Also falls within the criminal thinking category. Currently, it is a 3-phase program. The first phase, clinicians are looking at the sexual history, any trauma that's connected with their history, helping the offenders to formulate their autobiographies, which is really happening throughout services. Is kind of used as a living document that they are able to add to, and their accountability of the offense. Second phase, you would see them talking more about the offense from this perspective of like what happened prior to, what was their behavior like, what was the grooming activities that they incorporated, how did they gain access, things of that sort, the tools that would be used, unfortunately, by a sex offender before committing that crime. And then the third phase is largely focused on relapse prevention planning. The current program runs about 2 years, depending on how they're moving through sessions. They're held once a week, hour and a half each. The groups tend to be relatively small for obvious reasons because of the intensity of the material and the time needed to process. So that is our current program. And as I believe the chief mentioned earlier, we are working through a process of redesign. So we are looking at changing the curriculum that we use. And right now we're looking at CBI, Cognitive Behavior Intervention, Sex Offender Program through UCCI. Identify that as our hallmark core aspect of our program. Our clinicians are trained to deliver that program. And the beauty of incorporating that, if you haven't picked up already, is that obviously it is based on the CBT model. Although we're targeting criminal thinking and we're going to focus on cognitive restructuring, we're also looking at skill building as well with that program. So there will be a lot of focus on those antisocial cognitions and thinking, the core beliefs attached to that, and then how they're transitioning, inquiry, Socratic questioning, challenging questions to kind of get them to that place where what is the healthier way to think? What is the healthier way, to the healthier attitude and the healthier behavior? So there will be an intense process. It will be structured. So there will be time for them to process, but there will also be key opportunities for structure throughout the CBI-SO, where individuals will be able to also see their own development and evidence of such, which is also a key hallmark of CBT, is being able to objectively see one's progress moving through services. So we're really excited, excuse me, about that, incorporating that fully. We anticipate having our first group using the CBI-SO curriculum in the fall. If we can do it sooner, we certainly will, but we're looking to start that fairly soon.
Okay, so we've done a previous learning session, one of these webinars on our redesigned substance use disorder program called Road to Recovery. So I'm just going to touch briefly on the CBT interventions that are used in it. So depending on the level, whether it's the R&R program at level 5 or the R&R program at level 4, one or more of the University of Cincinnati curriculums is used. So for level 5, the CBI CA or the core curriculum is used. At level 4, both the CBI SA and the CBI EMP is used. The curriculums, again, as Brad had mentioned, are designed to address criminogenic needs. The big 4 are antisocial behavior, personality, thinking, and associates, with the more minor criminogenic needs being family function, dysfunction, employment, leisure and rec time, and substance abuse treatment or substance abuse use. So the CBI is the core curriculum in all of those programs. And then we supplemented that with a company called the Change Company, and they have a journaling, interactive journaling series. So they have multiple series. We have 3 series, one for level 4, and then one for level 5 in the track 1 or the residential level of treatment, and another for the track 2 and 3 level of treatment or the outpatient intensive outpatient tracks. And so the advantage of the Change Company journals is those are journals that we give out to each one of the residents or the participants. And so it's anywhere from a 40 to a 50-page journal. It kind of sets up every 2 to 4 pages a new group. The individuals are told to do those 2 or 3, 4 pages of journal and bring that information back to them when they come back to the group the next time. And so there's different journals for different issues. So there's one for anger, there's one for stress, there's one for antisocial peers, there's one for the use of medication-assisted treatment. But the journals allow the individuals to actually write out some of their thoughts and concerns. Then it's reviewed as a homework assignment. And then the next 3-4 pages are gone over in the group that day for about an hour. And then the process repeats itself. And again, these are a little bit less intense, probably more socially interactive CBT journals that we've found to be very helpful to partner with the CBI treatment. Next slide, Heather, please. So thinking things through, or TTT, is our DOC gave it this name. This is actually the CBI core curriculum, but we just wanted to have a different kind of name for it. So it utilizes the cognitive restructuring techniques. It's 55 sections. It's approximately 28 weeks long. And again, the CBI teaches participants how to effectively manage risk factors. And so they also will get some homework. So they'll come to the group for 2 days a week. After each group, they're given some type of homework to go back and practice. So maybe it's how to have a conversation with somebody that they wouldn't typically want to have a conversation with. So I've sat in the groups, I've listened to the participants, they talk about how they went back and they had a conversation with a correctional officer that works their tier. Then they come back and they talk about how that was. Whatever the curriculum for that lesson talked about, how to engage, how to manage the conversation, how to end the conversation, eye contact, all of those things that are part of the curriculum for that day. They will come back and then kind of talk about in the group the next time what worked well for them, what changes they need to make, etc. And so I think we have 2 more slides, but just one more thing I want to interject right here. So we also use the Cincinnati program checklist. which is a tool that we use to kind of make sure that all of these curriculums that we're using and the programs that we have in place are using those 80 or so research-based interventions that are most likely to reduce recidivism. And so that CPC tool is something that we go in and review all of our flagship programs with. So the Thinking Things Through, the T for C, and the R2R programs all kind of get that review to make sure that they're being implemented the way they were designed to be implemented. All right, next slide. So low dose programming, I mentioned earlier, we have this low dose programming that we're delivering to probation violators. So if I'm on probation, I'm in the community, I've had some challenges with maybe coming to see my officer, maybe I had some very minor charges, maybe I had police contact, maybe it was unreported. Whatever it was, if the probation officer thinks that it's important for me to maybe have an intervention of some kind, this is something that they can use to do that. And so typically the facility where that individual will go is notified by Wednesday that they'll be arriving. They arrive sometime Friday afternoon or evening. They stay the night. The next day, Saturday, they have 2 hours of CBT programming. One of the journals that's used, or the curriculums, is Getting Motivated to Change. These all come from the Texas Christian University Mapping Enhanced Counseling series. And the one huge thing about TCU is that it is evidence-based, but it's also free domain. So if you'd like to Google Texas Christian University Mapping Enhanced Counseling, you'll be able to see all of these curriculums available to you as well. This also requires training by the counselors, similar to all the CBI and the Change Company journals. And again, that's one of the things that was brought to us through the Vera Institute, is that we want to replicate an intervention. So no matter who's doing the intervention, whether it's Brad, Vanessa, myself, we deliver the same programming the same way each and every time for best outcomes. And I think that's it for this, Heather.
Yeah, thank you, Chief Records. We're actually going to launch a poll right now. So Chief Records and Dr. Benefield have been talking to us about the different CBT offerings or program offerings that include CBT within the Department of Corrections. So the question we have for you right now is, Department of Correction offers cognitive behavioral treatment and interventions at what levels? Level 5, level 4, probation and parole, or all of the above? So we'll give a few seconds for people to weigh in. Thank you so much. You guys are great. Putting answers up real quick. Give it another few seconds. All right, and I will end the poll in just 1 second. All right, and let's share results. So 97% of our participants believe that DOC offers CBT and CBI at all of our levels. So level 5, level 4, and probation and parole, and that is the correct answer. We are offering this programming in all of our, for interventions in all of our facilities. And I'll add to which, as Chief Records was talking about, how we are conducting the CPC with the flagship programs to monitor for our program's fidelity. We also undertake analysis of our capacity on a regular basis. So we are able to do a gap analysis and take a look at what needs our population is scoring, right? So do they have group A, group B, group C program needs? And then we are able to compare that to the programs that are being offered in our facilities. And one of the undertakings, I think back in 2015, indicated that our population had a high need for group B programming, but the department had a low offerings, a low number of offerings for group B programming. So what we have all the things that we're talking about today has been the focus of being able to offer the type of programming that the people under our supervision need. So part of, in addition to monitoring the program's fidelity, we are also monitoring our population for what needs they have, and then kind of seeking out and finding programming to meet those needs. So I think we have one more slide about offerings within DOC for Chief Records or Dr. Benefield.
Yeah, so the University of Cincinnati, as you've probably heard, has quite a suite of interventions, and they kind of flow from level to level and from are able to be used in multiple types of programming. So it's something that we're heavily invested in at this time. One of those interventions is EPICS. So it's an acronym for Effective Practices in Community Supervision. And it was designed to be an evidence-based strategy to supervise probationers in the community. So it's a strategy, but it uses CBT concepts. And so I think Brad will give you an example of one of those interventions in a slide or two to come later. And so EPICS is a strategy to engage individuals in order to ultimately change behaviors and, again, to reduce recidivism. And it incorporates really two things. One is core correctional practices, which I don't think we've talked about on here yet, but that's appropriate modeling and reinforcement. So the training to the probation officers teaches that appropriate modeling and reinforcement. It talks about skill building and problem solving strategies. And that's one of the things that the probation officers work with individually with the probationers on their caseloads. It talks about the effective use of community resources. So what's available in the community that can connect that person to, staying out of, bad situations after dark or things like that. So what are things out there in the community that can help the individual that the Department of Correction doesn't have the capacity to provide itself? It also talks about the relationship factors and building rapport, and ultimately the appropriate use of authority. So, like a parent, when is the right time to tell somebody they did something wrong? When is the appropriate time to praise somebody for something that they did right? And so it couples, EPICS couples the core correctional practices with some type of structured interview or structured office visit. And so there's a check-in that begins the session, and that's where there's, again, that rapport building that goes on, but it's also an opportunity for the probation officer to assess how a person is doing, if they're under any kind of stress, if there's any kind of an acute issue that needs to be addressed. Then there's homework that's been assigned from the previous visit. And so the PO kind of goes through the homework with the individual, identify any kind of areas of concern that still need to be worked on. Is there a new area of concern or some type of problematic situation that the person wants to work on before the next visit? And then they kind of go through what is the behavior change that they're looking for. And that's the behavioral thought map. And that's I think what Brad will do in a slide or two. Then the individual gets some homework. They'll identify a situation where the person thinks that they can improve their problem solving skills, or maybe how they interact with people. So they get a homework session, and then the next time they come back in for their office visit, they kind of go through what happened with the probation officer and get some guidance on how that went well, how that didn't go well, how they could maybe improve for the next time. And so that's essentially what EPICS is. I think that's it for us, Heather.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Benefield and Chief Records. We will turn it back over to Brad now, who's going to give us an insider look at some cognitive behavioral treatment and interventions.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. I do want to take a moment to recognize, right, well, let's reflect, right? We have the risk need responsivity model. We are targeting high risk individuals, right? We are targeting criminogenic needs. and we're responding with evidence-based CBT curriculum, right? We're following R&R, right? But what's extremely important, and I think sometimes we overlook, is the facilitator, right? These models, these lessons plan, the curriculum that I'm about to show you is only as good as the person facilitating the group, right? And, you know, speaking as a facilitator and speaking for all my facilitators in prison right now, that's not always easy in a correctional setting, right? For all the reasons that you were probably aware of. You saw a picture in an earlier slide where there was about 10 to 12 participants in a correctional setting. You might have a whiteboard to teach concepts, but other than a whiteboard and 12 people in front of you, you're left to teach how to change behaviors, how to change underlying beliefs and values and thoughts. That is not an easy task at all. So one, kudos to the individuals either on this call or in our facilities right now, facilitating CBT groups. And kudos to the DOC for continuing to invest in staff training and fidelity monitoring to support the individuals facilitating these curricula. Because you can have the curricula, you can have the right people in the group, and you can be targeting criminogenic needs. But if the teacher, the facilitator, isn't also well prepared, then, you know, there's not as much gained or learned. So represent for all those facilitators out there. It's not an easy job, and I appreciate you. But let's take a look at a curriculum that we use often. So if you could jump to this next slide. This is the CBICA, Cognitive Behavioral Intervention Core Adult. As Chief mentioned, there are various curriculum by the University of Cincinnati. They have a core adult version and they have a core juvenile version. So they've distinguished between the two. And this curriculum, similar to the other curriculum, follow a similar pattern. So right up front, there's a pre-engagement module. And pre-engagement and even module 1, right, are all about building rapport with the participants, establishing expectations, right, and generating some motivation to want to participate, right? What are some things that we can improve upon, right? What are some skills that we can learn? What could we get out of this group? Is essentially what the sessions in the pre-treatment module in module 1 are all about. Establishing rapport, expectations, and some goals for the future. That's basically it, right? Module 2, as you see on this screen, starts to introduce some basics of CBT, right? We introduce this concept of connecting our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. We even talk about some basic skills that we're going to need throughout the group to be able to do this well. Some of those skills include active listening and giving feedback and asking questions. Those are all core skills that participants will need throughout. So in module 2, right, we're just intro to the basics, talking about some core skills we're going to need throughout the curriculum. Module 3, though, is where we start to introduce the concept of cognitive restructuring, right? It's one thing to identify what our risky thoughts have been and what are some problematic, you know, personality characteristics that we have. It's another then to replace those antisocial thoughts or cognitions with more pro-social thoughts, right? And so module 3 is where the majority of the action happens. The majority of learning needs to happen in module 3 to move on to the next modules. And one of the tools that we use in module 3 that we introduce is called the behavior chain, right? If you go to the next slide, you'll see what a behavior chain looks like. It's just a worksheet. It's just a tool that can be used to help individuals identify how their thoughts and feelings can influence their actions and ultimately their consequences. And the way we teach the behavior chain is to first start with a situation, right? And a situation is an external event. It's not something you typically have control over. It is usually, you know, referred to people, places, and things, right? A person that's potentially a trigger, a place, a thing that brings up, you know, a risky situation for you. What is the external event, right? It's very objective. It should be factual, right? Removed of opinion and whatnot. And then we process that situation, right? We process our thoughts, our feelings. We move through the chain. There's usually an action that happens after, and then we process the consequences. The behavior chain can be used in all types of different settings. I mean, you could, obviously we're using it in correctional settings, but I use this with my daughter. I use it for myself. And let's go through an example now, maybe a realistic example to see how a behavior chain works. So perhaps I'll start with something that we could all relate to. And this is a fictional situation. It's not mine, right? Hypothetical situation. But let's imagine that I have a bit of a shopping problem, right? I love to shop, probably spend too much money on clothes. One night in particular, I come home, right? I have 2 bags of new, fresh J. Crew clothes. I enter the house where my lady is. She sees me walk in with these 2 bags of clothes in my hand. And the moment I walk in, she snaps. There you go, spending all your money on clothes again. What the is wrong with you? That's her reaction. I just simply walked in the door. I do have the bags in my hand, right? And she, for lack of a better description, she snaps on me, right? That is the situation. I walk in with 2 bags of clothes and my lady snaps at me about spending too much money on clothes. That is the situation, okay? Now, if we can get some chatter in the chat, give me some examples of thoughts that I might have in that immediate situation. Before I say or do anything, what are some thoughts that might come to my head? Here we go again. Damn, I need a drink. Okay, yeah. It's not that serious. What kind of business? What business of it to her? Right? Maybe I'm reading that wrong. I'm going back to shop, right? Or how dare she tell me how to spend my own money? Or I'm a grown man, I can do what I want to do, right? It's none of her business how I spend my money, right? I need a drink, or here we go again, or damn, I'm going right back out the door. Yeah, here she goes again, right? These are our thoughts, right? And if we're thinking those things, how dare she, it's none of her business, I'm a grown man, I can spend my money how I want to, or I earn this money, I can spend it how I need to, right? If I'm thinking those thoughts, what feelings might I have? Feelings are typically one-word responses. Anger, resentment, hurt, annoyed. I don't know if this is a feeling, but maybe emasculated a bit, right? And if I'm thinking,
pick one that's really hard to spell, Brad. Emasculated.
Yeah,
Spelling doesn't count, all right?
It doesn't matter, right? Doesn't matter. But if I'm thinking, how dare she, or I'm a grown-ass man, I can spend my money how I want to, or, here we go again, and I'm feeling emasculated and annoyed and hurt, right? And a bit resentful, what action might I have? I lash out. Yeah, I snap back. I could throw the bags and snap back, right? Let's go with that one. I throw the bags down all dramatically, right? And I snap back at her. Who the are you to tell me how to spend my money, right? And I go off on a tangent, right? Cuss her out. That's what I do. Now, what are some positive consequences? You see me moving through the behavior chain. What are some positive consequences to me snapping out and telling her how I feel? Come on, there are some. Yeah, I release some energy. All right, I feel better in the moment. I stuck up for myself. I got to tell her, right? Potential positive consequences. Feel a little bit better about myself. Yeah. Opened up. Sure. Yeah. It's probably not too many more, right? Yeah, I'm not letting her take advantage of me, right? Got my emotions out, stood up for myself. Okay, those are some positive consequences. Yeah. What about the negative consequences? Well, we're certainly in an argument now, that's for sure. Increased tension between the two of us. Yeah. Hurt her feelings, right? That's a consequence. Estrangement, we break up. I'm not sleeping in the bed tonight. I might be sleeping on the couch. She might kick me out, right? It may be perpetuating and more tensions and problems between the two of us, right? Point here is these consequences, right? Both external and internal. External meaning I'm not sleeping in the bed tonight. Internal meaning, you know, I am more angry, right? I might even feel guilty, right, for hurting her feelings and getting, you know, and responding the way I did. There are all kinds of negative consequences that come with that action. And chances are they outweigh the positive, right? Is that clear on this behavior chain? When we do these behavior chains, we're not here to judge an individual on what their thoughts are, right? We're simply asking them to reflect on them, to write them all down, right? They might give you some nasty ones. How dare she? Who the hell does she think she is, right? I am simply writing them down or allowing them to write them down on a behavior chain worksheet, right? I'm not judging them. I'm not saying that's stupid. You shouldn't think like that. None of that, right? Simply write down your thoughts in that moment, your feelings, how they influence your action. Again, CBT, thoughts, feelings, behaviors, right? And let's process the consequences. We often call this, we play out the tape, right? Now, this is a situation that isn't exactly tied to crime, right? This is tied to my relationship with my lady, my communication skills in that situation, right? Not exactly tied to criminal behavior. And it doesn't always have to, right? We're not constantly going through situations about crime because in reality, that's not the case, right? Now, there are many situations, right, that are directly related to crime, and I'll give you one in a second. But I think it's important to note, right, that these situations, these risky situations, these triggers can be tied to communication skills, can be tied to our relationships with others. And if we're not good with that, if we don't have the self-control with all kinds of situations, well, they can spiral, right? One of you commented with, oh, I need a drink now. All right, so when I argue with my lady, then I tend to go to the bar and have one too many drinks. And when I go to the bar and have too many drinks, right, I might not be waking up for work in time. And that puts work at risk. And then I got to explain to my probation officer that I missed work. And then I'm sleeping at my friend's house because she kicked me out. So you see where this normal situation, right, not directly related to crime, can spiral into more problems for an individual. So it's not just all about crime. And I want to make that clear here. And I try to make that clear to individuals and group. We're not just talking about criminal behaviors. We're talking about all things. But for purposes of example, well, another important note, I never leave a behavior chain unrestructured, right? So let's restructure this, right? So we always do two behavior chains. The situation remains the same, right? My lady responded, she snapped at me when I came in with the 2 bags of new clothes, right? Situation is the same. But what we do to restructure our thoughts, we look at the negative thoughts we have in that box there, and we come up with a replacement thought for each one of those negative thoughts. So one of those negative thoughts was, here we go again. Somebody give me a positive replacement thought to counter that one. Yeah, maybe she's right. That's a simple replacement thought. Maybe she's right. Another one might be, right, I said, I'm a grown-ass man, I can spend my money how I want to. A replacement thought might be, maybe I shouldn't spend the money if we don't have it. Yeah, Keenan said, hey Keenan, by the way, Keenan said it's coming from a place of love. If I'm replacing one of those negative thoughts, like here we go again, if I can replace that with, well, maybe she's just coming from a place of love and she cares about how I spend my money, right? If I'm able to restructure those negative thoughts with a more productive, more empathetic, more positive thought, we're probably going to have a different feeling. So if I'm thinking, man, she's probably right. She cares about me. She's just trying to help me save money, right? If I'm thinking those thoughts, what feelings might I have then? What feelings do those more productive pro-social thoughts? I'm a little bit more calm, right? I'm not as resentful. I might have some concern, I might be appreciative that she's got my back, right? Yeah, and if I'm thinking more pro-social, I'm thinking those restructured thoughts, and I'm feeling a bit more positive and like, you know, somebody's got me back, my back, right? What action might I take? Probably not gonna snap on her, right? I might even ask her, right, an open-ended question and says, you know what bothers you about my spending, right? Communicating, right? So not snapping out then encourages better communication, right? So my action is I respond with an open-ended question and check in how she feels, right? Thank her and ask her a question. That's perfect, right? That's our new action. And that new action in the behavior chain then comes with new consequences, right? Positive consequences, you know, for the sake of time, I'll just run down them, right? Positive consequences, well, I'm not getting kicked out of the house tonight, most likely. Now we're actually communicating about each other's needs and spending habits, right? So that's a positive consequence. Another positive consequence, she might feel heard, right? Because I'm asking open-ended questions, because I'm checking in, now your partner feels a little bit better. I might feel proud that I handled this differently than I did in the past. It's an internal positive consequence. And chances are those positive consequences are outweighing the negative consequences. So what's a potential negative consequence to me? Instead of snapping on her, I ask open-ended questions and we start communicating about her needs. What's a negative consequence out of that? It's probably hard to think of a few. And that's the point, right? If we can change the way we think, if we can restructure some of our negative impulsive thoughts, right? We can change the way we feel, we can act differently, and we can change our consequences. Take one good look at this behavior chain, and I want to point out a few things. Look at the boxes themselves. You have the situation box on the left, right? The word situation is outside of that box. And then you have the thoughts box, right? The word thoughts are inside, the same with feelings and actions. The words inside of the boxes are internal, meaning you have control over those things, right? You don't have control over the situation and you don't have control over the consequences. But what you do have control over are your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. And that is the whole point. In a CBT group, we run down many behavior chains. I want it to be imprinted in their brains so that they're playing out the tape, whether they have an actual chain or not. They're doing this on a regular basis. And I will tell you from anecdotal experience, I have run over 1,000 groups. I tell you, when I run into folks in the community or I see them again, they talk about this behavior chain and they talk about how often they use it. So for me, that is a win. Let's jump to the next slide. I'm sure we're running out of time here. But to wrap it all up, right? The curriculums that we're offering, Module 4, we're talking about feelings. Module 5, we're talking about personality characteristics, how we manage impulsivity, how we manage like self-centeredness, how we manage a low frustration tolerance. These are also important, right? Module 6, we're choosing different behavioral responses. So we're doing a lot of role playing and experimenting what it's like not to snap on somebody, right? 7, we're talking about problem solving. These are all basic skills of a CBT curriculum. If you jump to module 8, you'll see that there's a lot of action around peers and developing a pro-social support network and how to do that. That's because antisocial peers is a criminogenic risk factor that we're focusing. So most of the curriculum has something about peers. And then at the end, most curriculum has a sort of success plan, right? How are we going to apply these skills that we learned in this group in the future, particularly when we get out? Most curriculum, whether it's T4C, whether it's TTT, whether it's CBISA, and the whole alphabet soup that we just went over, most of them focus on the same stuff. But what's important, I want to note again, is delivery. and training our staff and how to be the best facilitators of this to increase learning and increase the likelihood that individuals actually change. I think that's it for me. So one, I want to thank everybody for participating in the chat. I hope some of this was helpful for you. You can reach me anytime at brad@socialcontract.com or .org. I'm actively facilitating groups. So if you ever want some pointer, you ever just want to reflect, I'm here to help whoever's on this line. So thank you, DOC, for allowing me to present. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Brad. And I didn't have that, that was such a kind of cool activity that I did not want to interrupt or stop us. So we are pretty much at the end of our time right now. And this is actually the first time we've ever kind of done this like interactive activity. And apparently before switching slides, I needed to delete all the text. So now the text is laying over all of the other slides that you're going to see, but now I know for next time. Just to wrap up, thank you so much to our presenters, Brad from Social Contract and Dr. Benefield from DOC and Chief Records from DOC. Thank you so much for participating and providing all this information to us. Thank you so much for the participants who came out again. We hope that you got a lot out of this and that you enjoyed it. What you have on your screen right now are some email boxes for the Department of Corrections. So if you have any questions or have any feedback, or if you would like to provide any suggestions on future webinars, please email that to the DOC reentry mailbox. And then you also have the Victim Services and Community Relations mailboxes here. If you have any questions about a specific friend or family member who might be under our supervision, you can reach out to the Community Relations mailbox and they'll be able to direct your question. We did get a couple of questions, and I think that we unfortunately don't have a whole lot of time. So what we will do is I think that we can work on kind of answering them via email after the fact. I think one of the questions that did get asked, I think we touched on it. The question was, what kind of evaluations do you have in place to assess how CBT is working with Delaware incarcerated? And I think Chief Records kind of talked a little bit about that, about how we are evaluating the programs to make sure that they're being done correctly. I think I touched a little bit on it, that we are analyzing the needs of our population versus the programs that we have available. And then the department also undertakes annual evaluations of programs. So we conduct assessments of the programs that we are offering to see if they are effective, and if they are being presented the way that they're supposed to be presented. So we do that annually. At least one program a year is evaluated for things like that. So the additional questions that we didn't get to, like I said, we'll try to answer them via email. I'd like to invite you to give us a little feedback also on today's webinar. I'm going to post a poll just asking how satisfied you were with the webinar. And remember, of course, that the results are anonymous. So please feel free to respond honestly. We can't improve unless we know how we're doing. And we also hope that you can join us next time for part 8 of the DOC Insider Series, which will be prison healthcare. That will be offered at on a date in June to be determined. So if you're here today, you probably are on kind of our mailing list, and keep an eye out for announcements on the Department of Corrections Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram. As I said in the beginning, we were recording, so this webinar will be posted to the Department of Corrections YouTube channel in the next few days. You're also able to view all of the previous webinars on the department's YouTube channel. We will make the PowerPoint available, and if you and certificates if you stay tuned through the majority of the webinar. So just want to again thank our presenters. I think that was a great webinar, and thanks for sticking with us as we were trying out some new webinar tricks. Appreciate your feedback on the polls, and thanks for attending, and we will see everybody next time for the next webinar.